Recently, I did a video on white supremacy groups.
If you want to learn some real history about Canada, go back and watch Matthew's video. Well done, sir, by the way. I just want to add something to that. I think a lot of people in Canada feel like we're safer from racism. They hear the stories of the horrors that went on in the deep south in the United States and they think, well, Canada's not like that. We weren't like that. Canada was like that. Canada was a white colonizer country. Both Canada and the United States did the exact same thing. They took over the land, they moved the indigenous people out of the way, they imported slaves from other countries, and then housed them here. They were treated as property and not people. Canada may have gotten rid of slavery sooner, but it wasn't that much sooner. Slavery in Canada ended August 1st, 1834. Slavery in the US ended in 1865. Rounding it out, we'll say 30 years. Canada made it illegal to import slaves in 1793, but it was only 7 years later that the US did. So now there's 30 years between the time that slaves can be legally imported and actually slavery is abolished. The first 30 years is exactly what Matthew talked about in his video. But just because something was abolished or made illegal doesn't mean it stops immediately. Do you think when slave owners found out that it was illegal to own slaves that they just handed them over and said, oopsie, my bad? No, they just went underground with it. Racism didn't end, it was just hidden. Technically, black people were allowed to own property in 1865 when slavery ended. However, it took them till 1968 to actually change building codes and regulations that stopped discrimination against black people. They would use districting, redlining, building zone violations, sometimes downright harassment and physical force to remove these people from the property. 1968. 57 years ago. I'm going to be 49 next month. How many people of color since 1968 do you think were given amazing enough opportunities to be able to build wealth, own property, and leave it to their children? How many of those black families had parents who had life insurance policies and were able to pay them out to their kids? How many of them do you think were able to get past the hiring racism and get amazing high-paying jobs? Jobs where they had pensions and life insurance and benefits for their kids. Because even though the paperwork part of it was fixed, the racism still exists. Even today, black people are shuffled into low-income areas. Just the other day, in 2025, I saw a video of a black man in a nice neighborhood, a gated community, who was taking out his garbage, and a woman questioned him on whether or not he lived there because he was black. Racism is still alive. It never went anywhere. They just hid it under different pieces of paper, and then when they couldn't shuffle enough pieces of paper, they just started doing it quietly under their breath. Racism in Canada has been the exact same all these years. Don't think we're better because we're Canadians. Look at the horrors that Canadians inflicted on the Indigenous people of this country. We need to start remembering history as it actually is. And Canada and the US have been best buddies for decades. Because if you think that the outlawing of racism by Canada 30 years earlier is a big deal, it's not. That's not even one full generation. Canada was just as complicit and just as racist. We just shuffled our timeline forward a little bit more. Racism is still alive. When I see black women getting doxxed on this app, when I see Indigenous creators get run through the ringer, racism is still alive. You see a white couple walking down the sidewalk and a black man is approaching from the other way, and the husband pulls his wife to the other side. Subtle, but racism is still alive. And for anyone saying, why can't we have white pride? Because white is not a heritage. White is a skin color. You can be Irish, you can be Swedish, you can be Ukrainian, but you can't just be white. Black people are called black because they don't know where they were stolen from. They don't get to say, I'm from Sudan or I'm from Nigeria, because they don't know. They were stolen. So they take pride in their culture because they share the same cultures. White people don't have a culture. We just have cultures that are stolen from everybody else. And let me remind you that white people used to be just the British. When they invaded the land, they took slaves over pretty much anybody, regardless of their skin color. But then they figured out that the slaves outnumbered them. Can't have that. So what they did is they enticed the other light-skinned people to their side. They said, oh, those black and brown skinned people are easy to identify, and therefore they're the villain. We're going to teach you how bad they are and how they need to be policed. Hey, you know what? We could give you a small monthly stipend and a badge to make you feel important for you to help us police these people. But hey, it'd be a good enough job to at least feed your kids, right? So the other fair-skinned people jumped on board. And to this day, racism is still alive. And now you hear the anti-immigration rhetoric from the United States and from Pierre Poilievre. Because the black and brown people are your enemy. And now we have white Christian nationalist fight clubs starting up in order to prepare for this race war that they see coming. Racism is alive and well in Canada. And if you didn't know that, then you're not paying attention. And if you're not paying attention, ask yourself why. What color is your skin? First they came for the immigrants. Then they came for the trans people. Then they'll come for the LGBTQ community. Then they'll come for anyone with dark skin. They're coming for the homeless. They're coming for the mentally ill. Wonder what constitutes being mentally ill? Trump derangement syndrome? Or maybe reading one of Danielle Smith's banned books? At least in Canada, we don't have RFK Jr. making that decision. But when premiers like Danielle Smith are pushing the anti-trans ideology, it's coming for Canada too. People in Canada need to wake up. There are people in this country who still want slaves as property. And all they are waiting for is the United States to pull the trigger. We are not safe up here in our little northern wilderness. We are not better than the Americans because we stopped slavery sooner. Our histories are connected. And all the horrors you see that are happening in the dumpster fire of a basement that we have, every single bit of it is headed this way if we don't shut it down. Alberta people are the front line right now. They are standing up against Danielle Smith and her rhetoric. They got her to put her book ban on pause, and they got them to reverse the policy about transparency in spending. Everyone needs to be paying attention to what's going on in Alberta, because that will set the stage for the rest of this country. Racism is alive, and more people with my skin color need to be speaking out about it.